Mr. President, and I use that term very loosely. The words came out sharp, rehearsed, dripping with the contempt that had made Ilhan Omar famous among progressives and infamous among conservatives. She stood in front of the resolute desk, arms crossed, refusing the chair that had been offered because she wanted to stand, wanted to look down at him, wanted to show she wasn't intimidated by the office or the man behind it. I don't know what little power play you think you're pulling by summoning me here, but let me be crystal clear. I am not one of your scared little Republican congressmen who kiss your ring. I represent actual people, real Americans, not your billionaire friends and Mar-a-Lago cronies. She leaned forward slightly, voice rising, aggressive and confrontational in a way that had worked for her in every other political confrontation she'd ever had. And frankly, an elderly man with 91 felony indictments who can barely string a coherent sentence together, and who incited an insurrection against his own government probably shouldn't be lecturing anyone about anything. So if this meeting is about my statements on Palestine, about calling out Israel's apartheid regime, you can take your fake outrage and shove it. You done. President Trump interrupted calmly from behind his desk. He didn't look angry, didn't even look annoyed, just sat there with a slight smile, like he was watching something mildly entertaining, like a child throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. It was January 28th, 2025, just over a week into Trump's second term. The Oval Office on a cold winter afternoon, light streaming through the tall windows, illuminating the presidential seal woven into the carpet. This wasn't a normal congressional meeting. There were no staff taking notes, no photographers capturing the moment for the historical record. Just Trump behind the resolute desk, FBI Director Christopher Wray standing off to the side with thick folders under his arm, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem with her own files, and two Secret Service agents positioned by the doors, hands clasped in front of them, faces expressionless. Ilhan Omar had been summoned by White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles that morning. The call had come at 10, formal and brief. The president requests your presence at 3 p.m. urgent national security matter. No details, no explanation, no hint of what this was about. Just the summons. Omar thought she knew what this was about. She thought Trump was trying to intimidate her over her pro-Palestinian statements, over her criticism of Israel, over her tweets calling out U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. So she'd come ready to fight, alerted the media, had cameras waiting outside, planned to stand up to the bully president and show her supporters she was fearless, that no one could silence her. Now she stood in the Oval Office thinking she had the upper hand, thinking her media profile protected her, thinking Trump was just another old man she could dominate with righteous anger like she dominated every other confrontation in her political career. She had no idea what was about to happen. No idea that the meeting she'd prepared for bore no resemblance to the meeting she was actually in. "No, I'm not done," she snapped at his interruption. "You want to talk about national security? You're the national security threat. You're a racist who banned Muslims from entering this country. You're a fascist who puts children in cages. You're everything wrong with America wrapped up in a cheap suit and bad spray tan." She leaned forward on his desk, aggressive, confrontational, every word a weapon she'd used successfully on cable news for years. "You think you can silence me? I have millions of followers. I have CNN and MSNBC and every major progressive organization defending me. You're a weak old man playing tough guy because that's all you know how to do. Your own party barely tolerates you. Half your cabinet thinks you're losing your mind, and you want to threaten me." Trump still didn't react the way she expected. Didn't get angry, didn't yell back, didn't lean forward and match her aggression. He just sat there watching her with that same slight smile, like he knew something she didn't, like he was holding cards she couldn't see. "I'm not scared of you," Omar continued, her voice shaking with anger now, the kind of performative rage that played well on social media. "I've faced worse than you. I fled a civil war. I came to this country with nothing. I've been targeted by racists my whole life. You're just another bully who thinks his power makes him strong. But you're nothing. You're a pathetic old man who—" "Sit down." Trump's voice suddenly cut through her rant. Not loud, not angry, just cold and absolute. The voice of someone who'd run billion-dollar companies and wasn't asking, wasn't suggesting, was commanding. Omar paused mid-sentence. Something in his tone made her hesitate for the first time since entering the room. Something in the way he said it, in the complete confidence behind those two words, made her realize this wasn't playing out the way she'd expected. "I said sit down," Trump repeated, his voice still calm but carrying an edge of steel underneath, the edge of someone who knows he holds all the power in the room and is about to use it. "Because what I'm about to show you is going to change your entire life, and you're going to want to be sitting when you hear it." For the first time since entering the Oval Office, Ilhan Omar felt a flicker of real uncertainty. This wasn't the script she'd prepared for. Trump should have been yelling back at her by now, should have been getting defensive, should have been doing exactly what she'd expected. But he looked completely relaxed, almost amused, like someone watching a play whose ending he already knows. Slowly, reluctantly, she lowered herself into the chair facing his desk, the confidence starting to waver just slightly, just enough to notice. Trump leaned forward, and the slight smile disappeared. What replaced it was something colder, more serious, more dangerous. The expression of someone who'd spent decades in business destroying opponents, someone who knew how to use power not through volume but through precision. "You think you're here because of your Palestine statements," he said quietly, his voice barely above a conversational level but somehow filling the room more completely than her shouting had. "You think I give a damn about your tweets? I don't care what you say about Israel. I don't care about your rallies. I don't care about your interviews with CNN. You're here because for the past 6 months, the FBI has been investigating you for terrorism financing and immigration fraud." He pushed a thick folder across the desk toward her, the kind of folder that contains documentation, evidence, the kind of folder that destroys lives. "And this morning, I declassified all of it." Omar felt her blood run cold. She looked at the folder like it was a snake coiled on the desk, something dangerous that might strike if she moved wrong. Her mouth went dry. Her hands, which had been gesturing so confidently moments ago, now gripped the armrests of her chair. Trump continued, his voice matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather rather than destroying a sitting member of Congress. "Your brother-in-law in Mogadishu," Ahmed Nur said, "he's an al-Shabaab financier. Treasury designated his money transfer business as a terrorism financing entity. And the money you've been wiring to him, $78,000 over 3 years, goes directly to terrorists." Omar's mouth opened. "I don't know what your citizenship," Trump kept going, ignoring her attempted interruption, "obtained through fraud. You claimed your mother died in Somalia. She's alive, living in London. We have passport records of you visiting her. You claimed you came as a refugee fleeing violence. You used a fake family name to qualify for refugee status. You committed immigration fraud to get here." He leaned back in his chair, the slight smile returning, but now it wasn't amused. It was predatory. "So here's what's going to happen. You have 72 hours to resign from Congress and leave the United States voluntarily. You renounce your fraudulent citizenship. You get on a plane. You go back to Somalia or wherever else will take you. Do that and all of this stays quiet. You can spin your resignation however you want. Health reasons, family reasons, whatever story you want to tell." He paused, letting that sink in, watching her face as the reality of her situation began to register. "Or you refuse, and tomorrow morning I hold a press conference in the Rose Garden. I declassify every single page of this investigation. The terrorism financing, the immigration fraud, the FBI watch list you've been on since 2018. I sign an executive order initiating denaturalization proceedings on national security grounds. DHS arrests you. You get detained while you fight it in court for the next 2 years. You lose because the evidence is overwhelming. Your citizenship gets stripped, and then ICE deports you to Somalia publicly, with every camera in the world watching." Trump's voice got quieter, more intimate, the way someone speaks when delivering the final blow. "Easy way or hard way. Your choice. You've got 72 hours. Omar sat frozen in her chair. This couldn't be real. This had to be a bluff, some kind of intimidation tactic, the authoritarian behavior her supporters had been warning about. "You can't do this," she said, but her voice lacked the confidence it had carried minutes ago. This is unconstitutional. You can't just strip a member of Congress of their. Director Ray, Trump said, not taking his eyes off Omar, his gaze fixed on her like a businessman who's just made an offer and is waiting to see if his opponent understands they have no leverage. Show her what we have so she understands this isn't a bluff. FBI Director Christopher Wray stepped forward, opening one of his folders with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd presented evidence in countless briefings. His expression was completely neutral, professional, detached. This was just evidence to him, just another case, just another subject. The fact that the subject was a sitting member of Congress didn't change the documentation. And as Ray began laying out 6 months of investigation, bank records and wire transfers and surveillance photos and intercepts, Omar realized with growing horror that this wasn't a bluff at all. This was real. The evidence was real. And her entire life was about to be destroyed. To understand how we got here, how the woman who'd been summoned expecting to bully the president ended up facing deportation, you have to go back 4 hours earlier, when Ilhan Omar was still confident this was just another performance opportunity, just another chance to be the fierce progressive standing up to power. 4 hours earlier, Ilhan Omar sat in her congressional office reviewing talking points with her communications team. The White House call had come at 10 that morning. Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, formal and brief, the kind of call that comes from the highest levels of power. The president requests Representative Omar's presence at the Oval Office at 3 p.m. today. Urgent national security matter. Please confirm attendance. No details beyond that. No indication of subject matter. No hint of what this was about. Just the summons, the kind of summons you don't refuse when it comes from the White House. Omar's communications director, a young progressive activist named Maya Hernandez who'd worked on several squad campaigns, looked concerned as she reviewed the message. National security matter is vague. Could be anything. Should we try to get more information before you go? Omar waved dismissively, confident in her read of the situation. It's obvious what this is about. I've been all over cable news calling out Israel's genocide in Gaza, calling for cutting military aid. Trump's donors are furious. This is him trying to intimidate me, trying to make me back down. Her chief of staff, a veteran Hill staffer who'd seen his share of White House confrontations, wasn't so sure. The phrasing is unusual, though. Usually when they want to complain about policy statements, they just have a staffer call. The president personally requesting your presence is different. Because he thinks he can bully me in person, Omar said with complete confidence, the confidence of someone who'd spent years being attacked and coming out stronger each time. He thinks if he gets me in the Oval Office, I'll be scared, that I'll moderate my positions. He has no idea who he's dealing with. She felt supremely confident, and why wouldn't she? She'd become one of the most recognizable members of Congress, part of the squad with AOC and Rashida Tlaib and Ayanna Pressley, nearly 4 million Twitter followers, constant appearances on MSNBC and CNN, a darling of the progressive movement. She'd made a career out of being the bold progressive who stood up to power, who wasn't afraid of anyone, who said what others were too timid to say. Trump had attacked her repeatedly during his first term, tweeted that she should go back to Somalia, called her an anti-Semite, made her a target at his rallies. Conservative media had obsessed over her for years, dedicated entire segments to her statements, her positions, her very existence. And every single attack had made her more famous, more powerful, more beloved by her base. She'd fundraised millions off Trump's attacks, turned his hatred into political capital. This would be no different, she told herself. Trump trying to intimidate her, her standing strong, refusing to back down, walking out and doing a media blitz about how she'd told him off to his face. Her supporters eating it up, sharing the clips, donating to her campaign. More fundraising, more fame, more power. This was an opportunity, not a threat. Alert our media contacts, Omar instructed Maya, already thinking about the aftermath, the narrative she'd control. I want friendly reporters waiting outside the White House. After the meeting, I'll do a statement about whatever authoritarian nonsense he tried to pull. CNN will probably want me live. Maya nodded, already texting contacts at major networks, setting up the performance before the performance even happened. But what if he actually has something serious? What if this is about something we don't know about? Omar laughed, genuinely amused by the suggestion. Like what? I'm a member of Congress. I have constitutional protections. What's he going to do? The worst he can do is yell at me, and I'm very good at handling old men who yell. She spent the next hour preparing, but not defensive preparation. Aggressive preparation. She wasn't going to the Oval Office to be lectured. She was going to make a statement to show Trump and the world that she wouldn't be intimidated, that no amount of presidential power could silence her voice. She rehearsed lines in her head, planned how she'd stand instead of sit to maintain the power dynamic, how she'd interrupt him if he started his usual rambling, how she'd call out his racism and incompetence to his face in a way that would generate clips and headlines. It would be legendary. Her staff would leak details. Progressives would celebrate her courage. The squad would rally behind her. It would be perfect. What Omar didn't know, couldn't have imagined in her most paranoid moments, was that while she was preparing her performance, Trump had spent the morning in the Situation Room reviewing 6 months of FBI investigation, evidence she didn't know existed, a case she'd never seen coming, documentation that would end not just her career but her entire life in America. And he'd specifically chosen today, specifically set this meeting for 3 p.m., because he had everything he needed to end her career and deport her from the country she'd fraudulently entered. He'd chosen today because he wanted to give her a choice, wanted to see her face when she realized she was finished, wanted to watch the moment when her confidence turned to horror. At 8 that morning, hours before Omar's summons, hours before she began preparing her confrontation, President Trump sat in the White House Situation Room with a small group. FBI Director Christopher Wray, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, NSA Director General Sarah Mitchell, White House Counsel Todd Blanche, and Chief of Staff Susie Wiles. The secure conference room table was covered with classified folders, financial records, immigration files, surveillance transcripts. 6 months of investigation compiled into evidence that would destroy a sitting member of Congress. Trump looked fresh, energized, the way he always looked when he was about to win, when he had the advantage and knew it. "All right," he said, settling into his chair at the head of the table. "Walk me through everything. I want to know every detail before she gets here this afternoon." FBI Director Wray opened his first folder with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent 30 years building cases, someone who knew that evidence was everything, that documentation mattered more than rhetoric. "We initiated the investigation 6 months ago, when Treasury flagged unusual wire transfers from Representative Omar to Somalia. The amounts were structured, 3,000 here, 5,000 there, always just under the $10,000 reporting threshold. That's a red flag for money laundering or terrorism financing." He pulled out financial records, bank statements highlighted in yellow, wire transfer confirmations with dates and amounts circled in red. "We traced the transfers. The recipient is Ahmed Nur said, based in Mogadishu. He's Omar's brother-in-law, her first husband's brother. Ahmed operates a Hawala money transfer network called Tawakkul Express." Hawala, Trump asked, unfamiliar with the term. "Informal money transfer system common in Somalia and throughout the Middle East and Africa," Wray explained, his voice taking on the tone of someone who'd given this briefing before, who understood the system intimately. "Based on trust and family networks. Very difficult to trace through traditional banking systems, but we obtained court orders and worked with Somali sources." Treasury designated Tawakkul Express as a terrorism financing entity in 2023. Wray continued, pulling out the official designation document. "Ahmed Nur said is on the FBI terrorism watch list." He showed surveillance photos from Mogadishu, grainy images of a man in traditional Somali dress, standing outside a storefront with peeling paint and a hand-painted sign. "This is Ahmed," Wray said, tapping the photo. "And we have evidence, intercepts, informant reports, financial tracking, that he funnels money from Tawakkul to al-Shabaab operatives throughout southern Somalia." Trump studied the photos, the way a businessman studies a competitor's financial statements, looking for weaknesses, for leverage. "And Omar is sending him money. $78,000 over the past 3 years, Ray confirmed, his voice flat, clinical, letting the numbers speak for themselves. 17 separate wire transfers, all structured to avoid reporting requirements. We've traced at least 34,000 of that money directly to individuals on terrorism watch lists, bank accounts belonging to known al-Shabaab commanders and facilitators. He laid out a flowchart showing the money movement, arrows connecting boxes with names and amounts, the kind of chart prosecutors use in RICO cases. Omar wires money to Ahmed. Ahmed moves it through Tawakkul. It disperses to multiple individuals throughout Somalia and Kenya. Some of those individuals are designated terrorists. It's not direct. She could claim she didn't know what Ahmed was doing with the money, but the pattern is undeniable. And she's smart enough to know exactly what her brother-in-law does. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem presented the next section, and her voice was tight with controlled anger, the anger of someone who'd spent months reviewing files and had come to understand the scope of the fraud. The terrorism financing is serious, she began, but the immigration fraud is what gives us the legal basis for denaturalization. Her entire presence in the United States is based on lies. She opened immigration files dating back decades, yellowed documents from the 1990s, applications with faded typewriter text. Representative Omar's official biography says she came to the United States in 1992 as a refugee fleeing the Somali Civil War. Says her mother died in Somalia when she was young. Says her father brought her and her siblings to America to escape violence. All of that is used to maintain her image as a refugee success story, the American dream incarnate. Noem pulled out documentation, modern records cross-referenced with historical files. It's also almost entirely false. Her mother didn't die in Somalia. Her name is Fajumo Aden. She's alive and has been living in London since 1991. We have British passport records. We have entry and exit stamps showing Omar has visited her mother in London at least 8 times since 2015. But publicly, Omar claims her mother died when she was a child. Trump leaned forward, interested now, seeing the pieces falling into place. So she's been lying about her dead mother being alive. It gets worse, Noem continued, her voice getting harder. The refugee application that brought her family to the United States in 1992 was filed under the name Omar family. But birth records we've obtained from Somalia suggest she was actually born Ilhan Nursed, last name Nursed, same last name as Ahmed the al-Shabaab financier. We believe she used a different family name, Omar instead of Nursed, to qualify for refugee status under family reunification provisions. She showed the documents, birth certificates with one name, immigration applications with another. If she was actually Ilhan Nursed, she wouldn't have qualified under the Omar family application. So she assumed a different identity. That's immigration fraud. Fraud that allowed her to enter the country and eventually become a citizen. Can we prove that? White House counsel Todd Blanche asked, playing devil's advocate the way good lawyers do. Birth records from Somalia during a civil war aren't exactly reliable. We have multiple sources, Noem said, ready for the question. Birth certificate filed in 1982 listing her as Ilhan Nursed. School records from Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya using that name. Testimony from individuals who knew the family in Somalia. And here's the smoking gun, her marriage records. She pulled out more documents, marriage certificates from different years. Omar married Ahmed Hiasi in an Islamic ceremony in 2002. They had 2 children together. Then in 2009, she married Ahmed Nursed Elmi in a legal civil ceremony. DNA testing from Somali sources suggests Elmi is her biological brother. She married her brother, likely to help him obtain immigration status. Then she divorced Elmi in 2017 and legally married Hiasi in 2018. Trump looked disgusted, the kind of disgust that's genuine rather than performative. She married her brother. We can't prove that definitively without DNA testing here, which she'd refuse, Noem admitted. But the evidence is strong. Same family name, same tribal affiliation, sources in Somalia saying they're siblings. The timing of the marriage aligned perfectly with him needing immigration status. Then she divorced him once he had his papers. It's a classic immigration fraud scheme. NSA Director Mitchell added another layer, opening her folder to reveal transcripts of intercepted communications. We've also been monitoring her communications under FISA warrant. She's in regular contact with Somali government officials, Muslim Brotherhood-linked individuals. Some of these contacts are concerning from a counterintelligence perspective. She showed intercepts, phone calls transcribed and translated, emails with redacted portions indicating classified sources. We have calls where she discusses U.S. policy toward Somalia with Somali government ministers, where she appears to be coordinating positions, where she refers to Somalia as we and America as they. Nothing explicitly illegal, but the pattern suggests her primary loyalty is to Somalia and Islamic political movements, not to the United States. Trump absorbed it all. 6 months of investigation laid out in folders on the Situation Room table. Terrorism financing, immigration fraud, fraudulent marriages, foreign communications suggesting split loyalty. It was overwhelming, the kind of case that ends careers and destroys reputations. White House counsel Blanche outlined the legal strategy, speaking with the precision of someone who'd spent decades navigating federal law. We have 3 potential paths. 1. Criminal prosecution for terrorism financing and immigration fraud. But that takes years, requires convincing a D.C. jury, and she'd be free while fighting it. 2. Push for congressional expulsion. Requires 2/3 vote in the House. Unlikely to get that many Democrats to vote for it even with this evidence. 3. Denaturalization. Explain that, Trump said, leaning back in his chair. If citizenship was obtained through fraud or material misrepresentation, it can be revoked, Blanche explained, citing the law from memory. Immigration and Nationality Act Section 340. We file a civil denaturalization complaint in federal court. Present evidence that she lied on her applications about her name, her family, her background. If the judge agrees the fraud was material to obtaining citizenship, it can be stripped. How long does that take? Could take 2 years if she fights every step, Blanche admitted. But here's the play. We offer her a choice. Resign from Congress and leave the country voluntarily within 72 hours. She can tell whatever story she wants. Health reasons, family reasons, going back to help Somalia, whatever. We don't press charges, don't pursue denaturalization. It all stays quiet. And if she refuses, then we go nuclear, Blanche said, his voice taking on the tone of someone describing a battle plan. Press conference announcing the investigation. Declassify enough evidence to show the public she's a terrorism financier and immigration fraud. File denaturalization proceedings. She'll fight it, but she'll lose. The evidence is too strong. And while she's fighting, she's toxic. No Democrat will defend her. She loses in court. Citizenship gets stripped. She becomes a deportable alien. ICE takes custody and deports her to Somalia. Trump smiled slowly, the smile of someone who sees the endgame. I like it. She gets to choose, but either way she's gone. Wiles added the political calculation, thinking several moves ahead the way good chiefs of staff do. If she leaves quietly, we avoid a media circus. No accusations of targeting Muslims or immigrants. She just fades away. If she fights, it becomes a huge story, but we have the evidence to back it up. Either way works. Trump made his decision, the kind of decision he'd made thousands of times in business, the decision to move forward with leverage and power. Set up the meeting for 3 p.m. Don't tell her what it's about. Let her walk in thinking she's going to lecture me about Palestine or whatever. Let her get comfortable. Let her do her performance. Then I'm going to give her the choice, and I want to see her face when she realizes she's finished. At 2:30, Omar's motorcade arrived at the White House. She'd alerted friendly media that she was meeting with the president, made sure the performance would have an audience even if only for the aftermath. CNN had a reporter stationed outside. MSNBC was on alert for a possible live interview afterward. Progressive websites had been tipped off to expect a statement. Omar walked through security with her head high, ready for confrontation, ready to stand up to the bully, ready to be the hero her supporters needed. She'd spent the car ride rehearsing her lines, how she'd call out his racism, his incompetence, his authoritarian impulses. all the greatest hits that played well on cable news and social media. She was escorted through the West Wing, down the hallway past photos of previous presidents, past staffers who barely looked up from their work, to the Oval Office. The door opened, and that's when everything went wrong, when the meeting she'd prepared for collided with the meeting she was actually in. The room wasn't set up for a normal meeting. No staff taking notes, no photographers capturing the moment, no other members of Congress to witness her performance. Just Trump behind his desk looking relaxed, FBI Director Wray standing with folders that looked ominously thick, DHS Secretary Noam with her own files, Secret Service agents at the doors with expressions that revealed nothing. Something was off, but Omar was committed to her plan, locked into the performance she'd rehearsed. She refused the offered chair, stood in front of the desk, and launched into her prepared attack. Mr. President, and I use that term very loosely, I don't know what little power play you think you're pulling by summoning me here. She went through every insult she'd prepared, every attack she'd rehearsed, called him elderly, senile, racist, fascist, brought up his indictments, his mental decline, his authoritarian impulses. Everything she'd been saying on Twitter and cable news for years, but now delivered to his face in the Oval Office, with the kind of aggressive confidence that had always worked before. Trump just sat there, let her vent, didn't interrupt, didn't get defensive, just watched with that slight smile like he was enjoying the show, like someone watching a performance they know will end badly for the performer. When she finished, breathing hard, feeling powerful and righteous, he asked simply, "You done?" She started again, more insults, more attacks, building to a crescendo. "Sit down." His voice cut through, cold and absolute. And for the first time, Omar felt real fear because Trump wasn't reacting the way she'd expected. And that meant this wasn't what she'd expected, meant she'd walked into something she didn't understand. "I said sit down," Trump repeated, his voice still calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Because what I'm about to show you is going to change your entire life, and you're going to want to be sitting when you hear it." Slowly, reluctantly, she sat, the confidence draining away like water through her fingers. "You think you're here about Palestine," Trump said quietly, his voice filling the room more completely than her shouting had. "I don't care about your tweets. You're here because you're a national security threat, and I'm giving you one chance to leave quietly before I destroy you publicly." He pushed the folder across the desk. "Director Wray, show her what we have." And Omar's world began to collapse, folder by folder, document by document, piece of evidence by piece of devastating evidence. FBI Director Wray stepped forward, opening his folder with practiced efficiency, someone who'd presented evidence in hundreds of briefings over his career. Terrorists, spies, criminals, corrupt officials. This was just another case. The fact that the subject was sitting across from him in the Oval Office didn't change the evidence, didn't alter the documentation. "Congresswoman Omar," he began, his voice neutral and professional, the voice of someone presenting facts rather than making accusations. "For the past 6 months, the FBI has been conducting a counterterrorism investigation involving financial transactions between you and individuals designated as terrorism supporters. Let me walk you through what we found." He pulled out financial records, laid them on the desk where she could see. Bank statements with highlighted transactions, wire transfer confirmations with dates and amounts, each one carefully documented and cross-referenced. Starting in January 2022, you began making regular wire transfers to an individual in Mogadishu, Somalia. Ahmed Nur said, your brother-in-law. The transfers were structured, always under $10,000 to avoid currency transaction reporting requirements. 3,000 here, 5,000 there, 4,000. Over 3 years, 17 separate transfers totaling $78,000. Omar tried to speak, but Wray continued smoothly, not giving her space to interrupt the presentation. "Now, sending money to family overseas isn't illegal. Many immigrants do it, support relatives back home. But we investigated where the money was going. Ahmed Nur said operates a business called Tawakkul Express. It's a Hawala money transfer network." He showed her surveillance photos, images of a storefront in Mogadishu, People lined up outside, the kind of informal banking system common in countries where traditional banking is unreliable. Tawakkul presents itself as a legitimate money transfer service for the Somali diaspora, sending remittances back home. But in November 2023, the U.S. Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control designated Tawakkul Express as a terrorism financing entity because we'd gathered evidence that it was being used to funnel money to al-Shabaab. Omar's face had gone pale, the color draining away as the reality of what she was hearing began to sink in. "I didn't know," she started, but her voice was weak. "Ahmed Nursaid is on the FBI's terrorism watch list," Ray said, showing the classified designation with portions redacted. "We have intercepts of his communications with known al-Shabaab commanders. We have informant testimony about his role in the organization's financial network. We have surveillance showing him meeting with designated terrorists." He laid out the money trail, a flowchart showing how funds moved from American banks to Mogadishu to various individuals throughout Somalia and Kenya. "We traced your transfers through Tawakkal's accounts. The $78,000 you sent didn't stay with Ahmed. It moved. We tracked at least $34,000 going to bank accounts belonging to individuals on terrorism watch lists. Al-Shabaab facilitators, weapons purchasers, people actively engaged in terrorism against the Somali government and African Union forces." He pulled out photos of some of these individuals, surveillance images of men in tactical gear, men with weapons, men whose faces appeared in classified intelligence reports. "These are some of the people who received money that originated from your wire transfers. This man, Abdullahi Hassan, is a known al-Shabaab commander in Lower Shabelle region. He received $8,000 that we traced back through the network to your transfer from March 2023. This man, Mohammed Abdi, is an explosives expert. He received $6,000 that came from your August 2023 transfer." Omar looked like she might be sick, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair, knuckles white. "I was sending money to family. I had no idea what Ahmed was doing with it." "You're a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee," Ray said flatly, his voice taking on a harder edge. "You receive regular classified briefings on al-Shabaab and terrorism financing networks in East Africa. You've been briefed specifically on Hawala networks being used for terrorism financing. You knew, or should have known, exactly what you were doing." He showed more evidence, phone records documenting calls between Omar and Ahmed Nursaid. "We also have phone records. You spoke with Ahmed 17 times over the same 3-year period, always just before or just after a wire transfer. On 4 of those calls, you discussed the political situation in Somalia, security conditions, information that could be useful to al-Shabaab in planning operations." "I was just asking about family," Omar protested weakly, but even she could hear how unconvincing it sounded. On a call from March 2023, Ray continued relentlessly. "You told Ahmed that U.S. military support for African Union forces was being reduced. That information was classified at the time. You learned it in a Foreign Affairs Committee briefing 2 days earlier. You passed it to someone on a terrorism watch list." Ray closed that section of his folder, moving to his conclusion with the precision of someone who'd given this speech before in different contexts. "The legal standard for material support to terrorism is providing any support, including financial, to designated terrorists, regardless of whether you specifically intend to support terrorism. You sent $78,000 that ended up in terrorists' hands. That's a federal crime carrying up to 20 years in prison." DHS Secretary Kristi Noem stepped forward next, and she was a former governor, not a career law enforcement official. But she'd spent months reviewing immigration files, and her anger at what she'd found was barely contained, visible in the tightness around her eyes, the set of her jaw. "Congresswoman," she began, her voice tight with controlled fury, "your entire presence in the United States is based on fraud. Your refugee application, your asylum claims, your citizenship application, all of it built on lies." She opened the immigration files, documents yellowed with age, applications from the 1990s with faded stamps and handwritten notes. Your official biography says you came to the United States in 1992 as a refugee fleeing the Somali Civil War. You were 8 years old. You say your mother died in Somalia when you were young. You say your father brought you and your siblings to America to escape the violence. You've told this story hundreds of times, in interviews, in speeches, in your memoir. It's your origin story. The refugee who became a congresswoman, the American dream. Noam pulled out a document, a British passport record with official stamps and seals. This is a British passport record for Fajumo Aden, issued in 1991. Your mother, who according to you died in Somalia in the 1980s. Omar's eyes went wide, genuine shock registering on her face. That's not. Your mother is alive, Congresswoman, Noam interrupted, her voice hard and unforgiving. She's been living in London since 1991. We have 32 years of records. Passport renewals, utility bills, National Health Service records. And we have records of you visiting her. Noam showed entry and exit records, official government documents from UK Border Force. You visited London in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2019, 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. 8 visits. Each time, surveillance cameras at Heathrow captured you, and phone location data shows you spending time at your mother's residence in East London. She laid out photos, airport security camera images showing Omar in various years, phone location data plotted on maps of London showing movement to the same address repeatedly. You've been visiting your supposedly dead mother for years while publicly claiming she died when you were a child. That's fraud. Lying about a deceased parent in your refugee narrative to gain sympathy, to build your political brand. I never said she died, Omar tried, grasping for any defense. I said I grew up without her, that's different. Noam cut her off by pulling up quotes, statements Omar had made in various forums over the years. Interview with CNN, 2019. I lost my mother when I was very young in Somalia. Interview with Time magazine, 2020. My mother died during the Civil War. Speech at a refugee advocacy event, 2021. As someone who lost her mother to the violence in Somalia, you've said it repeatedly, and it's a lie. She moved to the next issue, her voice getting harder with each revelation. But that's just one lie. The bigger fraud is your name. Your refugee application was filed under the Omar family, but you weren't born an Omar. You were born Ilhan said. She showed birth records, documents from Somalia with official stamps. This is a birth certificate from Somalia, 1982. Ilhan said, daughter of said Ibrahim, not an Omar. You used a different family name to qualify for refugee status under family reunification provisions. That's identity fraud. Birth records from Somalia during a civil war are unreliable, Omar said, her voice shaking now. We have corroborating evidence, Noam said, ready for every objection. School records from Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya listing you as Ilhan said. Testimony from individuals who knew your family in Somalia, identifying you by that name. And most damning, your marriage records. She pulled out marriage certificates, multiple documents from different years. In 2002, you married Ahmed Hiasi in an Islamic ceremony, had 2 children with him. Then in 2009, you married Ahmed said Elmi in a legal civil ceremony in Minnesota. Same last name as your birth name. We have evidence suggesting Elmi is your biological brother. You married your brother to commit immigration fraud, helping him obtain legal status. That's a lie, Omar said, but her voice lacked conviction, the protest automatic rather than genuine. Then take a DNA test, Noam challenged, leaning forward. Right now. We'll compare your DNA to Ahmed Elmi's. If you're not related, this theory is destroyed. If you are siblings, you committed marriage fraud. Omar said nothing, and the silence was more damning than any protest. You divorced Elmi in 2017, Noam continued, building the case piece by piece. Right after he obtained citizenship. Then you legally married Hiasi in 2018. Classic immigration fraud pattern. Marry a family member to get them papers, divorce them once they have status, go back to your real spouse. She stacked all the documents in a pile, the physical weight of the evidence visible on the desk. fake identity on your refugee application, lying about your mother being dead, fraudulent marriage to your brother. Every single piece of your immigration history is fraudulent. That means your citizenship was obtained illegally, and illegal citizenship can be revoked. NSA Director General Sarah Mitchell presented the communications intelligence next, and she was a career signals intelligence officer, had spent 3 decades intercepting enemy communications in various theaters. Presenting intercepts of an American congresswoman felt surreal, crossed lines she'd never imagined crossing. But the evidence was the evidence, and national security was national security. We've been monitoring your communications under FISA warrant since June 2024, Mitchell said without preamble, her voice clinical and detached. The warrant was approved based on probable cause that you were engaged in activities threatening national security. What we found confirms those suspicions. She showed call logs, pages of phone numbers and timestamps and duration. Over 6 months, you made 43 phone calls to Somali government officials. Not casual calls, strategic calls. You spoke with the Somali foreign minister 7 times, the defense minister 3 times, members of parliament 12 times, various other officials. I'm allowed to speak with foreign governments, Omar said, trying to find her footing. It's part of congressional oversight. The content of those calls raises concerns. Mitchell interrupted, and she played an audio clip. Omar's voice speaking in Somali with English subtitles appearing on a screen for those in the room who didn't speak the language. Omar's voice. The Americans are reducing their support for AMISOM. This creates an opportunity for the government to negotiate directly with clan elders in the South without U.S. interference. Somali official. When will the reduction begin? Omar, the briefing said March, but the administration doesn't want it public yet. Mitchell stopped the audio. That was you discussing classified U.S. military planning with a foreign government. Information you received in a classified Foreign Affairs Committee briefing. You disclosed it to Somalia before it was public. She played another clip, Omar's voice again, speaking to a different Somali official. Omar, I'm working with my colleagues to block the aid package to Kenya. If we can cut their funding, they'll pull troops from AMISOM and Somalia will have more autonomy. Mitchell stopped it, looking directly at Omar. You're discussing your efforts to undermine a U.S. ally's military operation. Not because it's bad for America, because you want Somalia to have more autonomy. Another clip, this one shorter but more damning. Omar, we are working on this together. I represent the Somali people in Congress. Their interests are my interests. Mitchell looked at Omar with something close to contempt. You don't represent the Somali people. You represent Minnesota's 5th District. You're a U.S. Congresswoman, not a Somali government representative. But you consistently refer to Somalia as we and America as they in these calls. She showed more intercepts, a pattern emerging across dozens of communications. You've also been in contact with individuals linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. 3 calls with Mohammed Beatty, an Egyptian national living in Qatar with ties to the Brotherhood. Multiple encrypted messages with organizations designated as Brotherhood fronts. The pattern suggests your political loyalty is to Islamic political movements, not to the United States. This is Islamophobic profiling, Omar said desperately, falling back on the defense that had always worked before. You're targeting me because I'm Muslim. We're investigating you because you sent money to terrorists and passed classified information to foreign governments, Mitchell said coldly, unmoved by the accusation. Your religion is irrelevant. Your actions are what matter. White House counsel Todd Blanche stepped forward with the legal framework, the roadmap for how this would proceed either voluntarily or involuntarily. He'd been a federal prosecutor before joining private practice, and then the White House, knew how to explain complex legal procedures in terms anyone could understand. Congresswoman Omar, he began, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining the rules before a game begins. Let me explain the legal situation you're facing. Under the Immigration and Nationality Act Section 340, citizenship obtained through fraud or material misrepresentation can be revoked. The standard is civil. not criminal. Preponderance of the evidence, not beyond a reasonable doubt. He showed the statute, the actual legal text. We file a denaturalization complaint in federal district court. We present evidence that you lied on your applications about your name, your family, your background. The evidence Secretary Noam just showed you. If the judge finds that the fraud was material to obtaining citizenship, your naturalization is revoked. I'll fight it in court, Omar said, trying to sound defiant but coming across scared, the bravado gone. You'll lose, Blanche said bluntly, with the confidence of someone who'd reviewed the case from every angle. We have documentary evidence of fraud, birth certificates showing a different name, your mother being alive when you claimed she died, marriage records suggesting fraud, phone records showing you visiting her in London. The evidence is overwhelming. He pulled out case precedents, legal decisions that had already established the framework. Here's Maslanjak versus United States from 2017, Supreme Court ruling on denaturalization. The court held that material fraud in immigration proceedings is grounds for revocation. Here's United States versus Ode from 2015, citizenship revoked for immigration fraud. The defendant fought for 2 years. She lost, got deported. Once your citizenship is revoked, he continued, laying out the timeline with precision, you become a deportable alien. Immigration and Customs Enforcement takes custody. You're detained pending deportation proceedings. Given Somalia's cooperation, you'd be deported there within 90 days. Omar's hands were shaking now, visible tremors she couldn't control. You can't deport a member of Congress. You won't be a member of Congress, Blanche said, his voice matter of fact. Once these charges become public, you'll be forced to resign or be expelled. The House isn't going to keep a member facing denaturalization for terrorism financing and immigration fraud. You'll be out within a week. He showed the timeline, each step laid out like dominoes falling. Here's how it plays out if you fight this. Tomorrow, the president holds a press conference, announces the investigation, declassifies enough evidence to show you're a terrorism financier and immigration fraud. The media goes crazy. Your Democratic colleagues distance themselves immediately. They can't defend terrorism financing. Within 48 hours, the House votes on expulsion. 2/3 majority required. With this evidence public, you'll get maybe 30 votes in your favor, all from the squad and the most progressive members who can't afford to abandon you politically. You're expelled. We file the denaturalization complaint. You fight it takes 18 months to 2 years. You lose, the evidence is too strong. Citizenship revoked. ICE arrests you. You're detained at an immigration facility. You could fight deportation, but you have no basis. Somalia is safe for you. You're not fleeing persecution. You get deported publicly with every camera in the world watching. He closed his folder, the sound loud in the quiet Oval Office. That's the hard way. Trump had been sitting quietly, letting his team present the evidence, watching Omar's face as each revelation landed, as the reality of her situation became undeniable. Now he leaned forward, taking back control of the meeting, the way he always did when it was time to close the deal. So here's the situation, he said, his voice conversational now, almost friendly, the tone of someone explaining terms to a business partner. We have you cold on terrorism financing. 78,000 to Al-Shabaab. That's 20 years in prison. We have you on immigration fraud, that gets your citizenship stripped and you deported. We have you on disclosing classified information, that's more prison time. He spread his hands, the gesture almost sympathetic. You fought back pretty hard when you came in here, called me senile, said I can't string sentences together, said I'm weak and pathetic. That was a bad call on your part because now I'm not inclined to be generous. Omar sat frozen, all the earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by something closer to terror. But I'm a deal maker, Trump continued, his voice taking on the tone he'd used in countless business negotiations over the decades. And I'm going to offer you a deal anyway. Not because I like you, because I don't want to spend the next 2 years dealing with this circus. So here's the offer. One time, take it or leave it. He counted on his fingers, each point a condition, each condition non-negotiable. You resign from Congress today, effective immediately. You hold a press conference tomorrow, you say you're resigning for health reasons or family reasons or to spend more time helping Somalia, whatever story you want. You renounce your U.S. citizenship. You leave the country within 72 hours. You go to Somalia or London to stay with your alive mother or wherever else will take you. You never come back. Do that, he said, leaning back in his chair, and we don't prosecute. We don't pursue denaturalization. We don't hold a press conference exposing everything. It all stays quiet. You get to control your narrative. You fade away. Maybe you end up in Somali politics where you clearly want to be anyway. Or he continued, his voice getting quieter, more dangerous. You tell me to go to hell. You walk out of here thinking you can fight this. And tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., I stand in the Rose Garden with Director Ray, Secretary Noam, and all of this evidence. We make it all public, every piece of it. The terrorism financing, the immigration fraud, your mother being alive, the brother marriage, all of it. The media goes insane. Your colleagues abandon you. You're expelled from Congress within a week. We file denaturalization. You fight it from a detention facility for 2 years. You lose. You get deported anyway. But instead of leaving quietly, you leave in handcuffs on a deportation flight with cameras rolling. The whole world watches Ilhan Omar, the great progressive champion, get deported for immigration fraud and terrorism financing. Trump's voice got quieter still, almost a whisper. Easy way or hard way. Your choice. But either way, you're leaving. The only question is whether you control how it happens or I do. He glanced at his watch, a casual gesture that somehow carried immense weight. It's 3:45 now. You have until noon Friday. That's 72 hours. If you resign by noon Friday and book a flight out of the country, we never speak of this again. If you don't, I'm calling that press conference. What's it going to be? Omar's voice came out as a whisper, barely audible. This is unconstitutional. You can't force a member of Congress to. I'm not forcing anything, Trump said, his voice suddenly hard again. I'm giving you a choice. Leave quietly or leave in disgrace. But you're leaving because you committed fraud to get here and you've been funding terrorists since you got here. You don't belong in Congress. You don't belong in this country. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. The discussion concluded. 72 hours. Director Ray will give you his card. When you decide, call him. If I don't hear from you by Friday at noon, turn on Fox News at 10 a.m. You'll see yourself getting destroyed in real time. Omar stood on shaky legs. The confidence she'd entered with completely evaporated. I need time to consult with lawyers. Consult with whoever you want, Trump said, already turning to other matters, dismissing her. But understand, if this goes public, no lawyer can save you. The evidence is too strong. You'll end up in Somalia either way. This way you get to leave with some dignity. That way you leave in handcuffs. He gestured to the door. 72 hours, don't waste them. Omar left the Oval Office in a daze, the Secret Service agents escorting her out through the West Wing in silence. She'd arrived 90 minutes ago, ready to lecture the president, to perform for her base, to be the fierce progressive standing up to power. She was leaving facing deportation, her entire life in America about to end. The reporters she'd alerted were waiting outside, CNN and MSNBC and various progressive outlets, all expecting a statement about how she'd stood up to Trump. She walked past them without a word, ignoring their shouted questions, got in her car and sat in silence as her driver navigated back to the Capitol. Her mind raced. This couldn't be real. This had to be a bluff, some kind of intimidation tactic, the fascism her supporters had warned about. But the evidence, the photos, the recordings, her own voice on NSA intercepts, the immigration documents, it was all real. Every piece of it was real. She spent that evening with lawyers, not her usual progressive activist attorneys, but criminal defense lawyers, immigration lawyers, people who dealt with serious federal charges, who understood the law rather than just the politics. They reviewed what she told them about the evidence, asked careful questions, took notes with grave expressions. And every single one gave her the same advice: take the deal. If even half of what they showed you is real, one lawyer said, a former federal prosecutor who'd handled terrorism cases, you can't fight this. Terrorism financing is a strict liability crime. Doesn't matter if you intended to support terrorism. You sent money to someone on the watch list, it went to terrorists, you're guilty. That's 20 years. The immigration fraud, another lawyer added, a specialist in denaturalization cases, that's grounds for revocation. If you lied on your applications, used a fake name, your citizenship can be revoked. We could fight it, but with the evidence you described, we'd lose. The standard is preponderance of the evidence, and they have documentation. And you can't stay in Congress through this, a third lawyer said, someone who understood the political realities. The moment it becomes public, the pressure for expulsion will be overwhelming. Democrats won't defend you, they can't. Terrorism financing, immigration fraud, you'd be toxic. They'd vote to expel you to save themselves. But Omar couldn't accept it, couldn't accept that Trump had beaten her, that she'd walked into the Oval Office thinking she had power and walked out facing deportation. She spent Wednesday in denial, didn't resign, didn't call Ray, told herself this would blow over, that Trump was bluffing, that he wouldn't actually go public with this because it would make him look authoritarian. Thursday she started to panic, called more lawyers, all gave the same advice. Take the deal. Leave quietly. Fighting would only make it worse, would only extend the suffering, would only guarantee the worst possible outcome. Thursday night she drafted a resignation letter, stared at it for hours, couldn't bring herself to sign it. This was her career, her identity, her entire life. Friday morning at 9 a.m. her phone rang. FBI Director Ray. Congresswoman, it's 9 a.m. You have 3 hours. The president is prepared to hold the press conference at noon if he doesn't hear from me that you've resigned. I need your answer. I need more time, Omar said, her voice desperate now. You've had 72 hours. What's your decision? Silence on the line, stretching out, each second heavy with consequences. Then I'm not resigning, Omar said finally, unable to surrender, unable to accept defeat. This is unconstitutional and I'm going to fight it. Understood, Ray said, his voice neutral, professional. The press conference will begin at noon. I'd advise you not to make any statements until you see what evidence we're releasing. It'll be worse than you think. He hung up. At 11:45 a.m., the White House announced an urgent presidential press conference in the Rose Garden at noon. Topic: National security matter involving member of Congress. No other details. The media went insane with speculation, theories flying on social media and cable news. Which member? What did they do? Is this about classified documents, foreign contacts, financial crimes? By noon, every network had cut to live coverage. Cameras trained on the Rose Garden, reporters speculating wildly about what was coming. Trump walked out to the Rose Garden podium at 12:02 p.m., and behind him stood FBI Director Ray, DHS Secretary Noam, Attorney General Pam Bondi, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. The presence of that group, the heads of law enforcement and national security, told experienced Washington reporters this was serious. This was real. This wasn't political theater. Trump began without preamble, without his usual preamble about fake news or the media, just straight to the substance. I'm here to announce that the FBI has concluded a 6-month counterterrorism investigation into Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota. The investigation found that Representative Omar sent $78,000 to individuals designated as terrorism supporters. That money was used to fund al-Shabaab terrorist activities in Somalia. The press corps erupted, shouted questions overlapping, hands raised, cameras clicking. Trump ignored them all, continuing his prepared statement. The investigation also found that Representative Omar obtained her U.S. citizenship through fraud. She lied about her identity, lied about her family, and engaged in marriage fraud to help a relative obtain immigration status. Based on this evidence, the Department of Homeland Security is initiating denaturalization proceedings. More chaos in the press section, reporters trying to get Trump's attention, trying to ask questions, trying to understand what they were hearing. Director Ray will now present some of the evidence we've declassified for this briefing. Ray stepped to the podium with a binder, and for the next 20 minutes he laid out the case methodically, professionally. The wire transfers to Ahmed, Nur said. the designation of Tawakkul Express as a terrorism financing entity, the money trail to Al-Shabaab, photos of terrorists who received the money, their faces pixelated but their identities clear from the captions. Then Noam presented the immigration fraud, the birth certificate showing a different name, passport records showing her mother was alive, marriage records suggesting fraud, airport surveillance showing Omar in London visiting the mother she claimed was dead. They showed just enough to make the case publicly without revealing classified sources and methods. But it was devastating, overwhelming, the kind of evidence that destroyed political careers and ended lives in America. Network split screens, the Rose Garden press conference on one side, Omar's congressional office on the other where reporters were massing outside, waiting for her response, for her statement, for anything. Omar's office released a statement within minutes. This is a politically motivated attack on a Muslim woman who dares to speak truth to power. President Trump is using law enforcement to target his political opponents. This is fascism. But the evidence was too strong, too documented, too real. Even progressive media couldn't fully defend it, couldn't dismiss it as political persecution when there were bank records and birth certificates and surveillance photos. Yes, Trump had political motivations. Everyone understood that. But the documents were real. The terrorism watch list designations were real. The immigration files were real. Within hours, Democratic leadership issued careful statements, calibrated to distance themselves without fully abandoning Omar yet. Speaker Hakeem Jeffries, these are serious allegations that must be fully investigated. If true, they would represent conduct unbecoming of a member of Congress. By Friday evening, calls for her resignation were coming from Democrats, not the squad who stayed silent, caught between loyalty and self-preservation, but moderate Democrats from swing districts who couldn't afford to defend terrorism financing, who needed to show voters they took national security seriously. Saturday morning, the House Ethics Committee announced an emergency investigation. By Saturday afternoon, articles of expulsion had been drafted by Republican members, circulated for co-sponsors, gathering names. Sunday, Omar appeared on MSNBC, insisted she was innocent, that the evidence was manufactured, that this was political persecution. But she looked scared, defensive, not at all like the confident firebrand who'd walked into the Oval Office 4 days earlier. Her usual certainty was gone, replaced by something that looked like desperation. Monday, the denaturalization complaint was filed in federal court in D.C. United States versus Ilhan Omar. The complaint laid out the fraud in detail, page after page, exhibit after exhibit. The birth certificate, the marriage records, the immigration applications with lies highlighted. Omar's lawyers filed an emergency motion to dismiss, argued the proceedings were politically motivated, that Trump was using his power to target an opponent, that this violated the separation of powers. The judge, an Obama appointee, denied the motion. Political motivation doesn't invalidate proceedings if the evidence of fraud is legitimate. We'll evaluate the evidence on its merits. Tuesday, the House voted on expulsion. The final count, 289 to 143. 86 Democrats joined all Republicans. Ilhan Omar was expelled from Congress. She became only the 6th member expelled in U.S. history, the first for immigration fraud and terrorism financing. The squad gave emotional speeches about persecution and Islamophobia, but even they couldn't vote against expulsion. The evidence was too strong, the political cost too high. They abstained instead, a cowardly middle ground that satisfied no one. Wednesday, ICE filed a detainer. Once her citizenship was revoked, she'd be taken into custody pending deportation. The process was moving forward, inevitable now, unstoppable. Omar fought the denaturalization for 18 months, her lawyers trying every argument, every procedural objection, every legal maneuver. Political persecution, unreliable foreign documents, technical defects in the proceedings, violation of due process. None of it worked. The evidence was too strong, too documented, too overwhelming. The judge found, by preponderance of the evidence, that she'd lied on her immigration applications, used a false name, lied about her mother being deceased, committed marriage fraud. Each finding was carefully documented, each conclusion supported by evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. In August 2026, the judge issued his ruling: citizenship revoked. The next day, ICE arrested her at her home in Minneapolis. She was detained at an immigration facility pending deportation, held in the same system she'd spent years criticizing, experiencing firsthand the conditions she'd called inhumane. She filed appeals, emergency motions, petitions for review. They were all denied. The evidence was too strong. Somalia confirmed they'd accept her as a deportee, that she was a Somali citizen, that they had no objection to her return. In November 2026, Ilhan Omar was placed on a deportation flight to Mogadishu. The scene was captured by cameras, permitted to document the moment for the historical record. Her in handcuffs, being escorted onto the plane by ICE officers, looking nothing like the confident congresswoman who'd insulted the president less than 2 years earlier. The flight took off, and America's most prominent progressive congresswoman was gone, deported, removed from the country she'd entered through fraud. Ilhan Omar arrived in Mogadishu in November 2026, stepping off the deportation flight into the country she'd claimed to flee as a refugee, the country she'd sent money to while living in America, the country she'd referred to as "we" in intercepted calls. Somalia didn't want her. The government made clear she wasn't welcome in politics, wasn't welcome in public life, was an embarrassment. The woman who'd been deported from America for fraud and terrorism financing, who'd lost her citizenship, who'd been expelled from Congress. She was toxic, a liability, someone to be avoided. She tried to rebuild, started a small NGO focused on women's rights, tried to leverage her name recognition into something useful. But without American citizenship, without her congressional platform, without the media that had loved her and made her famous, she was irrelevant. Just another person in Mogadishu trying to make a difference in a difficult country. Her mother in London refused to see her, told reporters through a spokesperson that she was ashamed of what her daughter had done, ashamed of the lies, ashamed of the fraud. The relationship was severed, irrevocably broken. Her children stayed in America with her ex-husband Ahmed Hiasi, who divorced her and got full custody when the fraud came to light. They changed their last name, wanted nothing to do with her, wanted to distance themselves from the scandal. She'd lost everything: her career, her country, her family. 2 years after her deportation, a Reuters reporter found her living in a small apartment in Mogadishu, working as an interpreter for foreign NGOs, a job far below her education and capabilities, but the best she could find. No political role, no influence, no platform. Just another person trying to survive. The reporter asked if she had any regrets. "I regret going to that meeting," Omar said, her voice flat, defeated. "I regret not taking the deal. I regret fighting. I should have left quietly." "Do you regret the terrorism financing, the immigration fraud?" She didn't answer that question. Couldn't answer it or wouldn't answer it, the reporter wasn't sure which. Back in America, her deportation became a political lesson, a warning taught in political science classes and law schools. You can immigrate to America, you can become a citizen, you can even get elected to Congress, but you can't commit fraud to get here. You can't fund terrorists. You can't maintain loyalty to foreign governments. Eventually, the evidence catches up with you. Eventually, the truth comes out. Trump spoke about it at a rally in Ohio in 2027, using it as an example of his administration's toughness on national security. "I gave her a choice," he told the crowd, his voice carrying over the cheering. "Easy way or hard way. Leave quietly with some dignity or get exposed and deported publicly. She chose the hard way. Bad choice. Very bad choice. She thought she could insult me, thought she could threaten me, thought her media friends would protect her. They didn't, because we had evidence, real evidence. And evidence doesn't care about your feelings or your Twitter followers." The crowd roared approval, chanting his name. "She's in Somalia now," Trump continued, smiling. "Probably wishes she'd taken my deal. But she thought she was tough, thought she could fight the President of the United States, found out differently. Some people learned the hard way. The Ilhan Omar case became precedent. Immigration enforcement was strengthened. Denaturalization proceedings were streamlined for fraud cases. Members of Congress faced enhanced vetting for foreign contacts, closer scrutiny of financial transactions. The rules had changed, the standards had shifted. And every progressive who'd defended her, who'd called it political persecution, who'd insisted the evidence was manufactured, had to reckon with the fact that it had all been true. The terrorism financing, the immigration fraud, the lies about her mother, all of it. She'd committed crimes. She'd been caught. She'd been deported. Not because she was Muslim, not because she was progressive, not because she criticized Israel or opposed Trump's policies. Because she'd broken the law. Because she'd committed fraud. Because the evidence was overwhelming. Years later, her story was taught in law schools. Immigration law classes about denaturalization, the legal standards, the procedures. National security classes about terrorism financing, how money moves, how networks operate. Political science classes about congressional ethics, about the limits of political immunity, about the consequences of fraud. The woman who'd stood in the Oval Office insulting the president, thinking she was untouchable, thinking her political profile protected her, had learned the hardest possible lesson. Nobody is above the law, not even a member of Congress, not even a progressive icon, not even someone with millions of followers and constant media attention. Trump had given her 72 hours to leave quietly. She'd refused, thought she could fight, thought she could win. So he destroyed her publicly and deported her anyway, methodically, legally, with overwhelming evidence. She thought she had power. She'd been wrong. The evidence had power. The law had power. The president had power. And Ilhan Omar spent the rest of her life in Mogadishu, regretting the day she'd walked into that Oval Office thinking she could bully Donald Trump. He'd smiled, let her rant, let her perform, let her think she was winning. Then he'd shown her the evidence that ended her career, stripped her citizenship, and sent her back to Somalia. Easy way or hard way, he'd asked. She'd chosen the hard way. And now she lived with that choice, in a small apartment in Mogadishu, working as an interpreter, irrelevant and forgotten. The cautionary tale of what happens when you commit fraud to enter America and think you'll never be caught. The evidence had been there all along, waiting to be compiled, waiting to be presented, waiting to destroy her. She just hadn't known it until Trump pushed that folder across the Resolute desk and said, "Sit down." That was the moment her life in America ended. Everything after that was just procedure, just the law taking its inevitable course. She thought she was untouchable. She thought wrong. And America moved on without her, barely remembering the congresswoman who'd been deported for fraud. Just another name in the history books. Just another person who learned that in America, eventually, the truth matters more than the narrative.